Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Deep Roots Movement. Tonight we are going to continue with 40 days of Dajjal in the Deluge. In the last video, we began contrasting the 40 days of Noah's, Nabi Nuh alayhi salam's flood with the 40 days of the one-eyed deceiver's deluge of the world with deceit and devil tech, and the fire to destroy organic humanity in the form of radiation. Now, I want us to think about, keep in mind, one of the hadith that we're going to be discussing here and in the next video is going to be what I call the Dajjal heaven and hell hadith, in which he's got, in one hand, he's got fire, and in one hand he's got water. So in one hand he holds what appears to be heaven or paradise, a garden, and in the other, hellfire, devastation. And our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says not to go toward the deceiver's paradise, because in fact it is hell, whereas we are to go toward the fire, which will be paradise for us. So I want us to consider this. Now, we need to quickly go back to the beginning. So humanity is created in an organic means, first in a spiritual reality, and then within the garden context, and then humanity, we sin, and we begin a journey. So we are exiled from the garden, but then we make Tawbah and Tazkiyah. I would argue that although we made individual Tawbah and Tazkiyah, we're still engaged in this process of moving back toward the garden. We left the garden, to the garden we shall return, inshallah, to paradise. We went from paradise to paradise. And I want us to consider that there are some alternate creation stories from other traditions. Now, many of you may be familiar with some of the Sumerian mythology, the ancient Babylonian mythology, Epic of Gilgamesh, and things that preceded that. I remember when I was about 14 or so, a couple of my great aunts, they were some eccentric old ladies, and I appreciate them very much. I learned a lot from them, and they used to give me books. I was a big reader, and I remember reading. One book that I read was Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, and a series that I read was the Earth Chronicles from Zecharia Sitchin. And this was my first foray or endeavor into comparative religion, into alternative views of ancient world history, and into comparative mythology. And in there's the myths are presented as basically you had this group of gods with a lowercase g. So these high-tech humanoid beings, they come to Earth from another planet, and they basically genetically engineer humanity. They create, they basically do a false creation of humanity, so to speak. So they take primates that were, already developing on the Earth, and then they they mixed in their own genetics in order to create a slave race. And there are different variations of the story. There's one variation where it's like they had different iterations where they created one group of humans that then, because they had a lot of the DNA from these advanced beings, and they also had the DNA of the native indigenous inhabitants of the Earth, so they could actually intuit, is actually, even if this is real, partly, it's like people have read it like, oh, it was because they had the God's DNA that they were able to, basically they decided we're not going to be slaves, and they walked away, and they left, and they went to a different area, and they lived freely. And I would argue that it would be, if that's possible, it might be because they had, DNA that was part of the indigenous clay here. So Allah can create as he chooses. He might use some other outside input to complete his plans, and it's still from Allah. So I don't, it's like, if we had been genetically tampered with, it's still part of Allah's plan. Now, that doesn't mean we allow it. We should never allow devils to do devilry. But I don't see any problem with considering these things, and I'm not limited in considering possibilities. So there was apparently a second iteration where these so-called gods attempted once more to genetically engineer humans, and then the previously freed humans came and basically convinced these humans that they were enslaved, and then that group left as well. And so there was a third iteration where they dumbed us down considerably so they could strip mine the planet for gold and resources. And so there was this process, and basically, so from the very beginning, we were manipulated, and we were being harmed by these outsiders who they claimed to be gods, but they were doing devilry. And this matches up with some of the other ancient Gnostic views of things, which Gnosticism is very complex and not quite what, how can I put it? I think it's more than meets the eye, and we definitely have certain connecting points to that tradition within our deen, and then there are unhealthy aspects that we reject and don't accept. So, and that's another video as well. But I want us to consider that that this genetic manipulation, we are seeing it's repeated within transhumanism, within the deceiver's vision for humanity, because what I see it is that there's a reboot taking place where humanity is being, where organic humanity is being eliminated in an apocalyptic manner. And we're going through an apocalypse, an engineered apocalypse. But it's still, Allah is behind all of this. You know what I mean? Because we are to come into maturity as human beings. So devils can never stop us from achieving our true destiny. Inshallah, we shall be successful, and we shall be matured and beautified and honor and praise the truth in all that we do. So I want us to consider so as he's doing this, he's also doing a new creation of humanity by mixing iron with clay, as Nabi Daniel alayhi salam discussed. From his visions when he was carried up into the heavens with the angels. I believe that that it was Jibril alayhi salam. I could be wrong about this. It seems that way to me. But anyway, he says that the clay and the iron would not properly adhere to one another, and there would be great suffering that would result from this admixture. And so the idea, the plan of the evil one and the beast and the beast system is not going to work out the way they intended, and it's already falling apart as it's being, as it's coming online and going live. In another video, when we talk about the Deceiver, we want to discuss him as a potential hybrid and maybe a descendant of the Nephilim or something along these lines. It's possible perhaps he's Horus or Osiris and able to actually transfer his consciousness from one body at the point of death to the next, or perhaps do straight up, so this is interesting. This is an ancient yogic technique that has been preserved in various yogic traditions. And it could be when he was imprisoned in a monastery and jumping between heaven and earth, that in fact he may have been, that might have been in a Buddhist monastery. We always interpret it as a Christian monastery. And it would be possible for many Arabs and many people in ancient times to have gone into a Buddhist monastery and assumed it was a Christian monastery, because there were a lot of similarities, especially in some of the Mahayana temples and monasteries. So it could be that basically maybe Buddhist monks that were high level, and spiritually aware, they actually imprisoned him there to prevent him from manifesting his plan. And then over time, he maybe launched an escape. And there are many different ways of interpreting this, but I want us to consider the possibility. We should consider the possibilities. We shouldn't just reject data. We need to actually sift as much data as possible to understand the truth. And we need to draw near to Allah in sajda in order, we need to collaborate, but ultimately we need to surrender to Allah. And we also need to purify our bodies and our minds and cultivate intuitive reason. Allah will guide us, inshallah, and grant us proper insight, Lord willing. anyway, so I went to the slave race narratives. Now, what's interesting is as the deceiver has this new creation, as the Antichrist creates this new creation, a transhuman in his image, because we are in Allah's image. There's a hadith that I appreciate very much and have derived much benefit from, where Allah takes his very hands and molds our melanated clay. You know, and I've read some people say that this clay is from 7 earths, you know, from 7 different types of clay, which is very fascinating. But regardless, it's like, so in all of his different names are manifested in his hands. And so he infuses us with the abdos, with these qualities into our very flesh, and then our water. So the clay is kun created clay and is the same as the environment around us. Also, we are, you know, clay has water within it. So this is sacred living water. Water holds vibration. Where was water created? From kun. So sacred water and living water that's kun created. And then ruh was blown into us, which animates us, gives us self-awareness, consciousness, and a conscience. And we were people of heart from the very beginning. And so this creation, so he infuses his qualities into us, so that through a purification process, you know, falsity will fade away. Everything is impermanent except the truth. And so the truth would be made manifest through the beautiful names. And this is a very, very interesting thing. And so the deceiver, he is mimicking this. He's imitating, like basically he set up his control grids so that, you know, like, because he wants to be all powerful, you know, omnipotent, wants to be all seeing, you know, omniscient, all hearing, you know, the aware. He wants to be able to manipulate weather, to you know, like to be able to cause droughts or bring abundance through genetic modification and various sciences and technologies. So he can bring fire down from the skies. He can do all kinds of things through technology. This is it's basically like I want you to consider that there is real spirituality and there's false spirituality. It's interesting that so much of what we're dealing with is digital. I would argue that we have a spiritual reality and we are to come into our maturity as organic beings and become perfected and beautified organically in a natural way. Evolution should not be tampered with. Our evolution is like a high-tech evolution. Matter of fact, when we come into our organic maturity, we develop technologies that are non-harming and that are in harmony with the environment and with our ecosystems. As Muslims, everything that we do should be just, it should be ethical, pure, and through the lens of mercy, justice, kindness. We should always minimize harm. Always minimize harm and maximize benefit. This is our actual way. This is the prophetic tradition. Anyone who's told you different, either they are actively lying to you or they have misunderstood something and they are not yet aware. Inshallah, they will be rightly guided. So I would say that I would submit to you that the deceiver, he's actually creating a false humanity, a transhumanity in his image. Now remember, when we've got, so I'll go back to that hadith where Allah has molded us from black melanated, you know, from dark melanated clay and infused us with ruh. That makes us in the image of Allah, the same way that if you would mold a statue from clay, that's an image of a God, but really it's an image of man, because, you know, like a statue is made by a human and doesn't have any powers in and of itself. And the same thing, humanity is animated and able to be self-aware and to use free will to seek out the best, most righteous path and to interact with all of creation and protect the weak, the defenseless, the innocent. We should eliminate to the best of our ability all tyranny, all oppression, and all enslavement, both within our bodies and minds and within the broader ummah, the greater ummah, so the Islamic ummah, the broader ummah of humanity, and throughout all of creation. We are called to be gardeners of Allah's creation. We are to be guardians of Allah's creation, protectors. We're to be guides. We are inheritors of the earth through Adam alayhi salam. So the deceiver, he's doing the same thing. He's molding. So instead of ruh, I would argue that he is going to infuse transhumanity with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence. Now, one of the words for intelligence is logos. So when we think about Christ or the anointed, the logos, and logos also gets applied to the Mohammedan reality as well, in many instances. But this is connected to our ruh. And this is again another video. And so we've got to consider that there is a false ruh blown into this image of a falsely created humanity that is genetically engineered, that has nanotech embedded, that has robotics embedded, that's cybernetic, might have, chips implanted in the brain or the hand, that might have robotic parts, or even to have human consciousness and awareness downloaded into a robot, or something along those lines, or into the internet, some form of the internet, maybe an intranet, like that's a trap where our consciousness, our awareness is trapped, and and maybe it's trapped within this intranet, and then the body that used to be ours, that was then mutated and made transhuman, is maybe possessed by AI, and the same way that the shayateen can possess a human whose spiritual immune system is lowered. The transhumans, their physical and emotional immune systems are lowered, and their spiritual immune systems. Otherwise, they wouldn't have even, been deluded enough to take devil tech and continue to absorb devil tech. So we need to be very aware of this. So it's like, consider the image of the deceiver, and he's got his name embedded in there. And there would be patents, there would be codes, perhaps. Now, another thing to consider that the deceiver might not be an individual, but a collective. And because he's always depicted as a malformed, not anatomically correct human, not a perfected, beautiful human, but he's deformed, and something's not right. He's hunchbacked. He's got one blind eye. He's got one wonky eye. So it's interesting that might actually represent humanity that has been transformed, and that then AI can possess, or maybe the deceiver is actually able to interface with AI, and you go through the digital realms in order to, and maybe he can then possess mass amounts of people as an individual somehow. We've got to consider all these different possibilities. I would say that one view is that the deceiver is actually a high-level yogi. You know what I mean? And involved in devilry. And maybe he would have been considered one of the ancient gods, perhaps a Horus or Osiris, a Thor, an Odin, a one-eyed deity, something along those lines. We've got to consider all the different possibilities. So we've got the flood of devil tech and deceit, 40 days of dajjalic rule, 1 year that keeps seeming like he keeps going and going and going. This is an interesting breakthrough. Heaven and hell hadith. So basically, we've got so the heaven he presents is going to be basically like, oh, you can go into these digital realms and you can do anything you want. It'll be like heaven. This is kind of like if you've watched the Battlestar Galactica series about the Cylons versus the organic humans, and then the prequel for that, which is what was it called? Caprica. It was only like 2 seasons, but they discuss things like these, like about humans being able to go into a virtual realm with virtual headsets, virtual glasses, and it's basically a hell realm. And at first, it seems like a heaven, but really, and people can do anything. They don't have to have any morals or manners, but eventually, it proves to be a hell realm, and people can get trapped in these realms as well. So this may be the hell that is depicted when it comes to the deceiver. Allahu alim. I'm open to possibilities. I'm just seeking the truth, and I'm seeking to understand what's going on, and to problem solve so that we can survive and thrive, inshallah, as a human species. All right. And also the hell that's suggested is actually living out in nature organically, and really, really seeking to derive the most ethical and pure sustenance from the land, to get to get the purest water possible. Now the deceiver is making that very, very difficult in a number of ways. We are free-ranging, free-roaming beings. We are to be guardians and gardeners of the world, and be able to travel freely, and to behave and trade in ethical and pure manner, to share with one another, to be of benefit to one another. Real dawah is always by maturing and coming into our moral and ethical excellence and purity and beautify it. And when we demonstrate our best and we demonstrate the prophetic realities, then automatically this is going to melt people's hearts. It's going to automatically, there's no manipulation necessary. There's no ego involved because it's an egoless process. What we do is we need to go egoless, and we need to manifest wisdom and compassion, inshallah. So I just want to make sure that I've covered these things also consider that there's an arc involved. So there's a real arc, the arc of the heart that I discussed, where, and I'm going to discuss a little bit further what the arc of the heart may mean in regard to conceptualization of the rapture, but not the Christian rapture. We're going to discuss this. There's a different sense. And there's also a dajjalic version of the ark. So the ark is to preserve his humanity, the ones he owns, because to possess is to own, and to mark is to own. Tattoos and mutilation were associated with slaveholding historically. So to receive the mark of the beast is a mark of ownership. And remember, in our mature, enlightened state, we are higher than the angels. In a degraded, humiliated state, we are lower than the beast. This connects to the beast and the beast system. Consider this very, very strongly, brothers and sisters. So there is a false arc related to transhumanism, and the arc may be actually being downloaded into, say, some quantum computer or into an intranet, so to speak, to preserve, while the organic humanity is supposed to be destroyed by radiation, by this by this invisible fire, a flood of it across the planet. This could be in other apocalyptic events. And then, to preserve those bodies, maybe these transhuman people, because of the pain and the suffering because they can't take the devil tech, because it's part of a survival of the fittest narrative, because devils love survive, because they're jinn supremacists, and they love jinn supremacists are all about survival of the fittest, and they have this conceptualization of the rule of law versus the law of the jungle. See, that's a trick, it's a trap, because the law of the jungle is actually natural law. Sharia is actually natural law through a prophetic lenswork or prophetic framework. And matter of fact, through utilizing this, we actually are to minimize and eliminate all government. We don't need all these rules because it will naturally manifest within us in a mature state as we move into the garden. When people want to actually create totalitarian, tyrannical laws, they are off path. They are off truth. Brothers and sisters, we got to consider this strongly. So I want us to consider that there's this false arc that maybe these transhumans, their consciousness is downloaded into robots or into an intranet or into a quantum computer or some other alternative. So there's an arc to preserve something about them to generate energy, kind of matrix style perhaps. While there is a way, according to the prophecies, we are going to have a significant portion of humanity that will survive, inshallah. But we've got to be sincere seekers of truth. So may we be successful, brothers and sisters. You are well loved and greatly appreciated. So in the next video, we will be discussing rapture and the arc of the heart, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is your brother Ilyasin, and we are the Deep Roots Movement.